Okay, so sorry for no webcam. I was unable to get my older recording software working properly. Um, this is Julian Canyon's presentation. Originally, I was going to do an anthropological uh, timeline of cultures that have a stronger foundation of dance and whether or not that makes them more aggressive of a culture versus ones that do not. But I thought of something I thought was like maybe a little bit more interesting to do. So I'm going to do a comparison of anthropological perspective and Western lens and the impact of tourism and how that has affected different regions, including the United States. So there are different ways that the West perceives through an anthropological lens different things that happens, not just like current culture, but past Western culture as well, such as like Salem and the excessive tourism that they have in Salem due to the witch trials and how that's impacted the infrastructure of Salem. In addition to modern day culture, such as Fort Lauderdale and the spring break culture that we have, where there's a lot of people that go to Florida one time a year, and that's been drastically impacting the infrastructure of Florida in regards to that. So I thought it'd be cool to do a comparison of all the different ways that we project um, like our lens from a Western perspective and how that's impacted, whether it be positive or negative, different cultures across the world, including for us. So, one example I'd like to bring up is Hotel Transylvania, which is based off of the Dracula series, which was filmed in the Romania castle. Oh my God, help me out right now. In Transylvania, in the Romania castle. So, over the years, there has been generations and generations of different vampire stuff that has spawned up since the original Dracula, and it has the current one I would say that's most popular among families is the Hotel Transylvania series, and that has sparked a lot of tourism, accounting for Romania's 5% of its total GTB, which is actually quite substantial. So that would be an example of positive influence of an anthropological lens for Romania. But you also have to take into account how that makes people view Romania. Like in reality, Romania is a very modern, up-to-date country with not that much differences from the rest of Europe, besides the fact that they have a drastically more bears than the average European nation. Apparently, Romania is known for having a crap ton of bears. I found that out when looking into this a bit, but they do have beautiful architecture, and a lot of this stuff is being impacted by tourism. Not all tourists are necessarily respectful or mindful of the environment, and it drastically impacts the infrastructure of places of where people are going. Another example of this would be a Gensha who was just going on with her day, and people were telling this woman to stop recording her. But she wasn't listening. She was just going. She was just continuously harassing
This
her,
lady
pretty
is the
much.
perfect example of what not to do as a tourist in Japan. She runs in front of the lady dressed in the kimono and tries to record her even after people tell her to stop. The woman in the kimono anxiously tries to avoid her and move out of the way, but the tourist keeps on recording her.
Obviously, she doesn't understand what she's
What do you
doing
think?
is wrong due to her ethnocentric point of view. It's preventing her from seeing how this is harassment and how this is just not okay. Obviously, tourism laws can only prevent so much. And then there's tourism bans that Japan is not shy of doing and such. But pretty much because we're so used to seeing stuff like this on TV and like in shows like Mulan or like other shows about Gensha and other stuff, like she's just so wowed to see one in real life, that she just becomes overwhelmed with that excitement and doesn't even take into account any cultural preconceptions that are not making that okay. And that how that can be considered harassment. Like if somebody were to come up to us on the street and just record us and chase us down with a camera, we would consider that harassment here even. And that's not a social barrier that is mute between Japan and the United States. You can't just chase somebody down with a camera recording them. And like even when people do something wrong, or even if they haven't done something wrong at all, it's considered extremely invasive. So she's not realizing that she's being evasive because of how that media is represented in the United States. So she's just overwhelmed with excitement of seeing a real one, and it's causing her to be invasive towards this particular individual, and that's not okay. So that would be an example of a negative influence of Western culture's lens coming out in tourism. We can go into a few other things. I didn't want to just cover tourism, but to wrap up on tourism, we have local resources, land degradation, pollution, air pollution, and noise. There's like a lot of details that go into it on the GDRC.org, and it talks about just like solid waste and littering. Like there's just a whole bunch of resources here talking about the negative impacts of tourism that we can just go into for longer than this video has. I'm not supposed to have more than 5 or 10 minutes worth of time. One other thing I did want to bring up, especially since I think I'm a little bit over time here, I'm at 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, is we tend to portray cultures that are not Western as almost demonic, and it's represented in our media quite often, especially when being compared and contrast against a Western view of a culture, and I wanted to bring up an example of that. So this would be a cinematic for a game. It was a very popular game at some point or another called World of Warcraft. My wife still plays it. I don't play it as much. I don't have time. I work and I just focus on school, so I don't have nearly as much time for games. But there's 2 new playable races, so players can play both of these things. And they're being put up against each other. But I wanted to show just an example of how often in media this is done. So where you have a Western perspective of things that are very considered in Western culture being put up against something that's not Western, not even necessarily Eastern, and being demonized pretty much. So as you see this, you have this warrior that's coming out of the shadows, that's bathed in light. Then as you see this darker creature, this is also playable, so it's not necessarily a bad character. It's not a bad character at all. It's crawling out of the shadows and looks more deformed. Again, more bathed in light. And then everything they do is swift and just to like the beats of whatever is going on with the cinematic or the music. And then she screams. She's dancing very much similar to the spirit dancing or the dancing healing that we covered in this course. And then again, very swift, just movements bathed in light. As you go back to the other side, just dancing around with tons of spirits and healing, which is anthropologically correct, but it's all done in darkness. There's lots of screaming that sounds banshee-ish that the character is projecting. And if you fast forward just a little bit, there is things that are known to the player base as more demonic, and they hiss and they scream. but the one that's bathed in light doesn't really make any noise at all, and the hissing and the screaming is very similar to the sounds that you hear from the spirit troll or the under troll that is projected from a different lens of Western culture. So like the absent of Western culture. So like whether that be Eastern or Africa, where they dance more. So I just wanted to bring that up. Is that it's very common, like whether it's witchcraft for or some as adverse form of healing to pave it as demonic and dark, even though that might not necessarily be the case. And even if it is dark, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. Like in one of the videos that we covered and the articles that we covered, it was talking about the how one of the Kalari spirit men, sometimes the voices that they hear are not welcoming voices. Like they're very scary sometimes. And that is something that they need to give into, but can be very exhausting on their body in order to perform the ritual healing. So I just wanted to talk about all these different things and whether or not our projection of this stuff is helpful. It does help people be more aware of these cultures that they do exist, like with True Blood and Raphael and him being like a Haitian spirit doctor. The representation is good, but we do need to work on how, at least I think that it would be an effort in the West to work on how we represent these people, because the negative impact on in tourism and the negative impact in media is quite substantial, and it could be portrayed in a way that's more positive and encourages more of a positive reaction when we bring that stuff into reality when interacting with those people. That's about it for my presentation. I hope it was okay.